Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where candle smoke curls through drafty corridors. The Thames smells faintly of rot, and somewhere in the distance, church bells echo ominously through the fog. It's London 1530s. The streets are damp, the laws are strict, and one man's name spoken too loudly might just get you dragged from your bed. And that man is King Henry VIII. You've heard the basics. Big guy's six wives broke with Rome. But tonight, we're not just ticking off marriages. We're living in his England, where fear of the king was as common as fleas. And trust me, there were a lot of fleas. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking the narrow, mucky lanes of Tudor London, probably in shoes that squish unpleasantly with every step. The air stinks of fish sweat and the occasional plague cart. Lanterns swing above you, casting gold puddles of light, but shadows stretch long in this city, where rumors walk faster than men. Every tavern's got a story, every priest's got an angle, and everyone's got a reason to watch what they say. Especially about the king. You pass a wooden post where a man's ear was nailed just days ago, punishment for speaking against royal policy. The ear's gone now, thank heavens, but the blood stain remains. The message, crystal clear. Henry VIII isn't just your monarch. He's your weather system, your economic policy, your Sunday sermon, and your Tuesday dread. Everything, everything runs through him. And lately, things are changing. You hear whispers that he wants a new wife again, that he's declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, that people are being arrested just for owning the wrong kind of Bible, that even rich nobles are keeping their mouths shut and their heads firmly attached for now. The Tower of London looms on the horizon. You shiver, not from the cold, but because you know what's behind those walls. Dungeons, yes, but also fear. Crafted, curated, cultivated fear. The kind of fear that keeps people obedient even when the king's not in the room. You duck into a tavern to get warm. Inside, the fire crackles, the ale flows, and nobody talks about politics, at least not above a whisper. One man eyes you warily when your coat sleeve brushes his. He's probably wondering if you're a spy. Another fingers a rosary under the table, careful to keep it hidden. Because in Henry's England, even praying wrong could be treason. And treason has very, very visible consequences. You finish your drink and step back outside. The wind bites harder now. As you pass the cathedral, you spot the royal decree nailed to the door, a new proclamation against seditious speech. The wording is vague like always, which is exactly the point. You're not supposed to know the line, you're supposed to fear crossing it. And so you do. You pull your hood up, walk faster, and try not to think about what happens to people who don't. Before we dive in, imagine this. You wake up one morning, and the Pope says, "You're damned, your soul, your marriage, your entire country, all officially excommunicated." And instead of falling to your knees in repentance, you shrug, break up with the Pope, and start your own church. That's the kind of energy Henry VIII was bringing to breakfast. The year is 1534, and the English world you're living in is tilting off its medieval axis. For centuries, kings and queens might grumble about Rome, but they still bowed to it. Henry, not anymore. Because the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry pulled off what some call the most audacious breakup in European history. He passed the Act of Supremacy, declaring himself supreme head of the Church of England. The word heresy suddenly takes on new dimensions. What was once sacred becomes suspect. The monks at your local abbey, they look nervous. The statues in your chapel, quietly removed. Your neighbors, watching to see which way you lean. And you're just trying to figure out which prayer won't get you arrested this week. At first, it feels like a bureaucratic spat, political theater, a king flexing over a marriage gone sour. But soon the real impact hits home. Church taxes are redirected to the crown. Religious houses are inspected and more often than not dissolved. You watch abbots loaded into carts, libraries torched, centuries of quiet devotion scrubbed out with royal ink. Your priest hesitates at Mass. He used to cross himself a certain way. Now, he flinches, catches himself, switches mid-motion. He doesn't want to be the next man hauled before a tribunal for popish behavior. Historians still argue whether Henry's motivations were theological or purely personal. Was it divine destiny or just a guy tired of his wife? Either way, you're left with a religious earthquake rippling through your life. Even the holidays shift. Feasts of saints disappear. Shrines are stripped of gold. Pilgrimages vanish like dew. Suddenly, the spiritual calendar that structured your entire existence starts to feel arbitrary. Your neighbor down the lane hanged for calling the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn unnatural. Not loud, not in public, just muttered over stew. That's all it took. And yet, paradoxically, this new royal religion is cloaked in familiar robes. Churches still hold services. Priests still wear vestments. For now. But there's tension in the air, like someone changed the rules and won't tell you what they are. You clutch a rosary in your pocket just to feel something solid, but you don't dare let it show. Because now, your king is your priest, and your priest is afraid of your king. Picture this. You're a lady-in-waiting at court, brushing Queen Anne Boleyn's dark hair, when the guards come for her, swift, silent, and polite. She blinks, straightens her back, and walks out without a scream. The next time you see her, it's her face on a pike. Welcome to Henry VIII's idea of romance. You'd think being married to the King of England would come with perks, jewels, castles, maybe even a crown or two. But under Henry, queenship is more like high-stakes roulette. Each spin might win you riches, or a scaffold. Catherine of Aragon lasted over 20 years. Loyal, diplomatic, a favorite among the people. None of that saved her when her womb failed to produce a surviving son. Divorce. Anne Boleyn clever. Captivating, perhaps too clever. She danced through courtly intrigue, turned heads, including the king's, and gave him the daughter who would become Elizabeth I. But then she had a few miscarriages, a few too many enemies, and suddenly she's accused of witchcraft and adultery with her own brother, no less. Beheaded. You shudder just thinking about it. Jane Seymour, sweet docile, pale as a milk jug. She gave Henry his long-awaited male heir and promptly died in childbirth, the one wife he actually mourned. Then came Anne of Cleves' poor woman. Henry met her and claimed she looked like a Flanders mare. He had the marriage annulled so fast it might have set a speed record. At least she lived. Catherine Howard, barely in her teens when they wed, already involved with other men, executed within 2 years for treason and infidelity. Another headless ghost added to the royal collection. And finally, Catherine Parr, the one who survived. Smart enough to play nursemaid and not challenge the king. Smart enough to read the room. By now, women in the court have mastered the art of silent panic. You learn not to smile too brightly, not to linger in the garden if Henry is strolling nearby, not to be noticed unless explicitly summoned. You perfect a curtsy so precise it couldn't possibly offend. Historians still debate whether Henry's marital mayhem was driven by dynastic desperation or just personal fury. Maybe both. But the end result is clear. Love is a liability. Affection is a weapon. In the most dangerous position in England, wife of the king. You wander past the palace corridors and catch a glimpse of a young courtier sobbing quietly. Her friend was just dismissed, banished, for an overheard joke about Anne Boleyn's necklace. Something about it looking too much like a noose. Nobody's laughing now. You return to your chamber and draw the curtain tight. Outside, the king feasts toasts and perhaps plots his next union. Inside, you pray your name never crosses his mind, because in Henry's world, being close to the throne doesn't make you powerful. It just makes you next. Let's say you're just a clerk in the royal stables brushing down horses, minding your business, and yet you find yourself looking over your shoulder when someone laughs too loudly behind you. Why? Because in Henry's England walls have ears, but more dangerously. So do servants. You can't escape the feeling that someone's always listening, because they are. The Tudor court is thick with informants, maids, guards, secretaries, even your friend from choir. Everyone might be on someone's payroll. It's not just nobles jockeying for favor. Henry's intelligence network stretches deep and wide like a spider web laced across the country. Whisper something too spicy at supper, and you might find yourself answering questions in a dark room with a sweating interrogator and no windows. The chief architect of this atmosphere, Thomas Cromwell, Henry's right-hand man, master of paperwork, master of fear. He doesn't need an axe to cut your throat, just a warrant and a wax seal. He re-engineers the kingdom into a surveillance state before such a phrase even exists. You pass by a village notice board. There's a new proclamation outlawing seditious rumors. That includes jesters who joke, poets who write, and fishwives who gossip. What counts as seditious, no one can say. That's the point. You remember that tailor from last week arrested for muttering something about taxes while fitting a nobleman's breeches. Gone. His shop shuttered. His wife crying on the steps. You wanted to ask what he said, but asking is dangerous too. Even at church, the homilies now echo royal edicts. The pulpit is no longer a place of comfort. It's a megaphone for state messaging. And you nod along. Not because you agree, but because the priest might notice if you don't. Historians still argue how centralized this network truly was, whether Cromwell was a genius manipulator or just good at making enemies disappear. Either way, you've learned the safest way to speak is to say nothing. And what of the tower? Its cells swell with accused traitors, some of them genuinely plotting, most of them just unfortunate enough to speak too freely. You hear of a man who died there without ever knowing what he was charged with. They said he sighed too loudly when Henry's name was mentioned. Even the nobility aren't safe. You walk past the manor and see servants burning correspondence in the yard, purging any mention of the king that might be misinterpreted. One line out of context could cost a fortune or a life. You write nothing personal. You say nothing risky. You trust no one fully, because in this kingdom, silence isn't just golden, it's survival. Before we get to the royal scandals and palace purges, here's a strange thought. What if your king was slowly turning into a walking, festering wound while insisting everyone still bow at his feet? Henry VIII wasn't always terrifying because of what he did. Sometimes he was terrifying simply because of what he was becoming. At first, he's the golden boy, tall, athletic, charming, fluent in multiple languages, a true Renaissance prince. Women swoon, men train harder just to keep up. But as the years grind on and the politics sharpen, his body changes, and so does the fear around it. By the 1540s, the Henry you see waddling down the palace corridor is nearly unrecognizable. His legs are swollen and ulcered. He has to be hoisted onto horseback with a mechanical lift. The stench polite courtiers say medicinal, but you've caught the real whiff is unmistakable. And yet, despite the infections, the breathlessness, the skin that looks like it's plotting rebellion, his ego only grows fatter. He orders his armor resized multiple times, his portraits retouched. No one dares paint the gout or the pus, not if they want to keep their fingers. When he enters a room, everyone stands slowly, solemnly, carefully avoiding eye contact unless invited. You've seen men tremble just from handing him a goblet, not from fear of the man, but fear of his mood, because moods mean policies, and policies, in Henry's case, can kill. He's irritable, suspicious, and prone to sudden rage. One day, he gifts you a pouch of coins for a well-phrased compliment. The next, he accuses your brother of treason for forgetting to kneel. Historians still argue how much of this was physical versus psychological. Did his leg injuries warp his brain with constant infection? Was the chronic pain fueling paranoia? Or was the real sickness always power? At a court mask, you watch him from a shadowed alcove. His robes are so heavy they require a page boy to carry the train. His face puffy and flushed shines with sweat, and yet everyone claps like he's still the dashing youth of 20 years ago. Because not clapping, that could be the end of you. You hear stories of doctors dismissed for too much honesty, of courtiers punished for suggesting he sit down more. One even dared mention exercise and was never seen again. Some say the king now surrounds himself with flatterers, not advisors. Others say he's simply chosen safety over truth. And you've learned that in Henry's presence, the only correct answer is, Majesty, you look better than ever. Even when he smells like rotting meat. Even when he can't walk the length of a corridor without collapsing. Even when his shadow passes over you and it feels like winter's come early. Because it's not just about survival anymore. It's about pretending the monster hasn't arrived, even when he's already in the room. Picture this. You're summoned to the palace not for anything bad, you think, just a routine council meeting. But as you cross the courtyard, the guards are already shifting uneasily, their halberds tilted just a little too close to your ribs. By the time you reach the chamber doors, your hands are sweating, and you realize something chilling. Nobody gets summoned for nothing. That's how it starts for many in Henry's England. One day, you're in his favor, lord of estates, confidant of the king. The next, your name is carved into a wooden block at the tower. You've seen it before. Thomas More, John Fisher, once powerful, respected, even admired. But they said no at the wrong moment, refused to acknowledge Henry's new religious authority, and paid with their heads, literally. And it's not just religious types. Nobles, relatives, advisors. Anyone who disagrees, hesitates, or even pauses too long before replying can vanish. At first, it's subtle property confiscated, titles revoked. Then comes arrest. Then interrogation. Then that long, silent ride to the tower. Some come back. Most don't. You remember hearing about Thomas Cromwell. Yes, that Cromwell hauled off after years of serving the king, discarded like a spoiled leg of mutton. No ceremony. No trial worthy of his rank. Just accusations, rumors, and a swift execution. His crime arranging a politically awkward marriage. Or maybe he simply knew too much. Historians still debate whether Henry was calculating or simply erratic in his punishments. Was he weeding out real threats or just trimming the hedges of paranoia? Either way, the message is brutally clear. Say yes or say goodbye. You once overheard a baron whisper, "Henry doesn't need a reason. He is the reason." And indeed, that's the terrifying part. Other monarchs issue laws. Henry is law. His will rewrites loyalty. His rage redraws family trees. You pass a servant scrubbing blood from the cobblestones near the chapel. No one asks whose it was. No one wants to know. At night, you sleep lightly. The shuffle of footsteps in the hall can sound like doom. Every knock at the door might be the knock. So you keep your records tidy, your words vague, your head low. Not out of guilt, but because you've seen how little it takes to fall from grace. You walk past a row of portraits in the palace, figures once exalted, now forgotten. Below each, a little brass plaque. One day, maybe yours will hang there too. Or maybe it already does. Imagine this. You're seated at one of Hampton Court's glittering feasts. The roast swan glistens. The goblets overflow, and laughter dances across the hall. But the tension under your collar is suffocating because tonight, one wrong toast might cost you everything. This isn't just a party. This is a performance. Henry VIII sits at the center, wrapped in velvet and fur, like a lion, bored of his own zoo. His eyes sweep the room lazily, but you know better. Every twitch of his brow is being measured by the entire court. Every smile he gives or withholds is a signal, and you, poor courtier, must decipher it in real time. You listen closely, not just to what's said, but what's not. A joke, told too boldly, the jester goes missing. a comment on the Queen's embroidery. Suddenly, the embroidery's treasonous. The rules shift by the hour, and your job is to pretend they never changed. You glance down the table and see the Duke of Norfolk sipping cautiously. He used to dominate these feasts until his niece Catherine Howard lost her head. Now, he chews slower, doesn't speak unless spoken to. There's that famous phrase, the walls have ears. But at Hampton Court, even the floors remember what you say. Tonight's entertainment is a mask, a dramatized allegory of virtue and loyalty performed by terrified young pages. One stumbles over his line. The king chuckles. The boy goes pale. Historians still argue how much Henry enjoyed these petty performances or whether he used them to measure loyalty like a fisherman checking bait. Either way, you know the truth. Every laugh here is political. The food is exquisite marzipan castles, spiced peacocks, pies with live birds bursting out in song, but you barely taste it. Your appetite can't compete with your instinct to survive. And then he looks at you. Just for a second. Maybe he's bored. Maybe he's annoyed. Maybe you've got parsley on your teeth. But you smile, bow your head, compliment the wine, say something neutral, flattering, safe. He nods, and the breath you didn't know you were holding finally slips out. Because for tonight, you're fine, still at the table, still among the living. But tomorrow, that depends on the mood of a man who once executed a chef for bad soup. Picture the nursery of a future queen. Quiet candle lit, the hush of attendants nearby. A little girl in satin stares at the door, wondering when, if her father will visit. Because when your father is Henry VIII, even being royal doesn't guarantee safety. You've likely heard of Bloody Mary, Queen Mary Bauer's daughter of Catherine of Aragon. But before she earned that nickname, she was a teenager, trembling under her father's shadow. One day, she's the king's beloved daughter. The next, her mother is divorced. Her legitimacy revoked, her royal title stripped. Now, she's just Lady Mary, and every embroidered cushion or bow of the head feels like a potential offense. You can't imagine what it's like to be demoted by your own father's decree, unless you are her. She clings to Catholic prayers in secret, even as Henry reforms the church outside her door. She refuses to acknowledge Anne Boleyn as queen, and for that he isolates her, takes away her staff, assigns new tutors with new messages. And Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, she learns early to smile sweetly and speak precisely. She knows her mother was executed for being too bold, too clever, too visible. So, young Elizabeth cultivates invisibility like it's a fine art. In this house, love is political, and childhood is conditional. You walk through the palace garden and spot them sometimes Mary at the window, pale and still, Elizabeth walking the gravel paths with silent steps. Both girls know their father's love is a currency that can be devalued overnight. Historians still debate whether Henry genuinely loved his children or saw them merely as pawns. What's undeniable is that each of them, Mary, Elizabeth, even young Edward, grew up fluent in fear, not just of execution, but of being forgotten, erased from succession, erased from affection. Even the nursery maids tread carefully. One slips and calls Elizabeth Princess after her title is revoked. She's dismissed within the hour. No one replaces her. The silence grows. And here's what's most haunting: when Mary later becomes queen, burning Protestants by the hundreds, she's not inventing cruelty. She's echoing a childhood lesson, one taught in whispers, punishments, and locked doors. You stand outside the palace one evening, watching the windows glow with candlelight. Somewhere in there, a future queen lies awake, listening for footsteps, wondering if she's still in favor, wondering if she's next. Let's set the scene. You're trudging along a muddy road near the coast, your armor creaking, your pack sagging with the weight of rations and prayers. You don't know whether you're about to fight the French or return to London and be executed for high treason. Because in Henry's England, foreign war and domestic terror often ride in the same saddlebag. The king fancies himself a warrior. He dreams of empire, of being a new Henry V. And so you march to Calais, to Boulogne, wherever the royal banner waves. But the truth: most campaigns are expensive, poorly planned, and bloody disasters. You're not conquering France. You're bleeding slowly into its soil. But here's the twist: Henry's real war is often with his own people. Back home, another noble family falls. A parliament is called mostly to collect more taxes. Rebels rise in the north, furious over the dissolution of monasteries, only to be crushed with theatrical brutality. The king promises clemency, then hangs their leaders anyway. You start to wonder if rebellion is just an elaborate death wish. You return from campaign to find your village changed. The parish church is stripped bare. The old abbot has disappeared. In his place, a stern-faced man with new prayers and fewer answers. Historians still argue whether Henry's foreign wars were a smokescreen for domestic repression, or whether his domestic terror was merely fallout from royal ambition. Either way, you're the one caught in the middle, a conscript in the king's endless theater of insecurity. Even his ships are paranoid. You overhear an admiral whispering about a storm blamed on a sorcerer. That man last seen boarding a cart for the Tower. You thought you'd fear the French, but it's not the fleur-de-lis that haunts your sleep. It's the royal seal, the parchment, the quiet knock in the night. Because the front lines aren't always abroad. Sometimes they're at your own front door. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. You're a 10-year-old prince seated stiffly at a banquet table, carving your meat with delicate precision. Because you've seen what happens to people who don't mind their manners around father. Being the child of Henry VIII isn't a blessing. It's a balancing act on the edge of a very sharp, very well-used axe. Prince Edward Henry's long-awaited male heir is watched constantly, not just for signs of illness, but for signs of attitude. Does he smile enough? Pray correctly. Revere the right parent at the right moment. Every word is recorded, every expression noted. You'd think a boy would be safe in the nursery, but in Henry's palace, even bedtime is political. You remember the chilling tale of Mary refusing to sign a document acknowledging her father's supremacy over the church. The punishment: isolation, surveillance, a deliberate campaign to break her will. Only after weeks of pressure and the threat of execution does she sign. And even then, she never quite recovers her old trust. Elizabeth learns a different lesson. After her mother's beheading, she becomes a master of discretion. You never hear her say too much, never too little either, just the right blend of charm and mystery. Even as a girl, she understands the safest person in the room is often the one who speaks last. And yet, despite all the tightrope walking, none of Henry's children can escape his orbit. One day, he praises Edward as a pearl of great price. The next, he flies into a rage over a misremembered Latin verse. You once saw him throw a golden goblet across the room during a lesson because Edward's handwriting resembled a tutor he disliked. Historians still argue whether Henry saw his children as legacy leverage or liabilities. Was Edward the golden hope? Was Mary just a bitter reminder of failure? Was Elizabeth too much like her mother to fully trust? What's certain is this: no one in his family ever spoke freely again. You walk the gallery at Whitehall and notice the portraits. Each child painted stiffly, formally, eyes fixed forward as if unsure which direction will please him most. No toys, no pets, no hint of childhood warmth. Just perfect posture and practiced fear. And you wonder, how does a father teach love when his love is edged with threat? Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he just teaches obedience. You kneel in the chapel, fingers cold, your breath fogging in the early morning chill. The Latin words on your lips feel heavier than ever, because now even your prayers can get you killed. Welcome to Henry's England, where religion isn't just sacred, it's dangerous. Before the break with Rome, the rules were clear. Catholic Mass confession, holy relics, safe, standard, sacred. But now, after the King's Reformation, everything's in flux. One year, you're told to destroy statues of saints. The next, you're questioned for failing to attend church. The line between devout and heretic shifts faster than you can keep pace. The dissolution of the monasteries has gutted entire counties. Buildings ransacked, monks scattered, libraries burned. You once passed a cart full of shattered stained glass hauled away like junk, what took centuries to build. Henry demolishes in months, part politics, part plunder, part performance. You remember old Brother Martin from the abbey near your village, harmless man, taught you to read, fed beggars and refused to sign the royal oath, hanged for treason. They left his body on display for days. Historians still argue whether this was religious zeal or royal greed in robes. Was Henry truly convinced of his own spiritual supremacy, or was it just a convenient way to seize land and power? Either way, the result is the same. You hide your old devotional book under a floorboard. Your grandmother clutches a rosary in secret, her hands trembling. Neighbors vanish after complaints of papist behavior. One woman was dragged out for lighting a votive candle on All Souls' Day, her only crime tradition. And yet conformity doesn't guarantee safety. A wrong Bible translation executed. A sermon that's too Catholic or too Protestant imprisoned. The very words Ave Maria can now lead to interrogation. You pass a printing stall and see pamphlets denouncing the Pope one week, attacking reformers the next. You don't know which way the wind's blowing. You just try not to raise your sails. At night, you pray in silence. Not because you doubt your faith, but because faith now comes with a death sentence. Picture the hallway outside the Queen's apartments, cold stone-thick tapestries, and the kind of silence that's louder than screams. You're told not to talk of her, not to mention her name, but you do anyway, in whispers. Because how could you not speak of Anne Boleyn? She's been dead for years, but in this palace, she's everywhere. They say she walks the corridors at night, head tucked under one arm, her gown rustling like dry leaves. Servants report hearing footsteps when no one's there, catching glimpses of a shadow near the old scaffold site. You scoff. But when the candles flicker unexpectedly, you say a prayer all the same. Anne wasn't just a queen, she was a force. Smart, sly, flirtatious, too quick for her own safety. She changed the course of history with her smile, and then she paid for it with her neck. You remember hearing the charges adultery, incest, treason. They sounded absurd even then. Her enemies piled on, eager for her fall. The king barely blinked. He was already courting Jane Seymour before Anne's head cooled. And yet her ghost lingers, not just in superstition, but in consequence. You see it in Elizabeth's carefully measured silence, in the empty rooms left unoccupied, in the way no one mentions the name Anne without checking who's listening. Historians still argue whether the charges were fabricated or just exaggerated. But the consensus is clear. Anne Boleyn was executed, not because she failed, but because she succeeded too well. You walk past the old scaffold site and feel the weight of history pressing down like fog. The grass grows uneven here. The stone platform is gone, but your imagination fills in the rest. The crowd, the hush, the sword flash, the silence after. And later that night, a lady in waiting swears she saw her, standing at the window, staring out across the Thames, waiting for justice that never came. You don't believe in ghosts, but in Henry's England, some stories never rest. Imagine you're seated at the king's banquet table. Gold plates shimmer, musicians strum delicate lutes, and a roasted boar glistens with honey glaze. It's decadent, dazzling, utterly excessive. But somewhere between the saffron stew and the jellied eel, a messenger whispers in the steward's ear. And just like that, dessert is canceled, because someone's about to die. Feasts in Henry's court aren't just meals, they're political theater. One part revelry, two parts fear. You're not just dining, you're being watched. Every gesture is weighed, every laugh parsed. Does your toast come too late? Your joke fall flat? Did you sit too close to the wrong person? Smile at the wrong queen? You once saw a noblewoman faint when her wine goblet was swapped mid-course. She was fine, but the implication? Not so much. Sometimes guests disappear between the roast and the wafers. One minute they're carving capon, the next their chair is mysteriously empty. You pretend not to notice. Everyone does. And the king. Oh, he's magnificent, draped in fur and rubies, belly full of wine and wrath. He cracks jokes, dabs grease from his beard, and sentences men to death in the same breath. Historians still argue whether these executions were carefully timed or spontaneous. But the pattern is clear. Henry blends terror with spectacle. One moment, you're admiring the embroidery on his doublet. The next, your cousin is being hauled off for conspiracy. Even the kitchens aren't safe. One cook was boiled alive for poisoning porridge. Whether he actually did it, no one knows. But now, every meal is triple tested and even the scullery boys recite loyalty oaths. You nibble cautiously on candied plums. Too sweet, too sticky, too risky. The fire crackles. Laughter returns. A lute plays something soft and aimless, and across the hall, a man's head rolls into a basket just out of view. No one flinches, because in Henry's court, blood is just another color on the menu. You're summoned to the royal chamber, not for treason, not for war, but because the king is dying. Or more accurately, he's rotting alive in his own bed, and everyone's pretending not to notice. The stench hits you first. Before the guards open the heavy door, it's already there, sweet, sickly, unmistakable. Inside, the king lies on a vast canopied bed. His frame is bloated. His face, once sculpted and strong, is puffy and purple with decay. His legs are bandaged, pus leaking through linen. The ulcer on his thigh never healed. It just festered. And yet, even now, no one dares say he's dying. Physicians hover whispering Latin diagnoses they know won't help. Courtiers stand at a polite distance, offering forced smiles and flatteries. Every phrase is measured. No one wants to be the first to suggest the king might not live to see spring. That would be treason or worse, an invitation to blame. You approach the bed, bowing low. He opens one eye glazed with pain and rasps something unintelligible. You nod as if it made sense. Then he laughs, or maybe coughs. You can't tell. Either way, flecks of red dot the embroidered pillow. Historians still argue what killed him. Renal failure, diabetes, infected ulcers. But the truth is, his body simply gave up after years of indulgence and rage. The bigger question, why did so many still fear him even as he slipped into fevered delirium? Because even in this pitiful state, Henry is still the king. He still signs warrants, still mutters names to watch, still orders feasts and banquets he no longer attends. His word, though slurred and half-forgotten, remains law. You once saw a lord executed for suggesting Henry be given last rites, another for writing a will too early. The wrong kind of preparation could be seen as an insult. So the court continues. Masks are performed just outside his window. Trumpets sound at dusk. The fiction of a functioning monarchy holds barely. One night, the chambermaid swears she heard him shout Anne's name in his sleep. Another swears it was Thomas More. Another heard nothing because she never goes near his room after dark. You glance at the walls. Tapestries hang limp, soaked with damp. The fire burns low. The most powerful man in England groans in his sleep, unaware that his kingdom already whispers about succession. And still no one dares to breathe the word death. Because until the king exhales his final breath, he's capable of anything, even vengeance. The bells toll at dawn, slow, hollow, final. And you know what they mean. King Henry VIII is dead, but no one cheers. No one sighs in relief. No one dances in the streets, because fear doesn't die with the man. You walk through London in the days that follow, and it's like the city itself is holding its breath. Portraits are draped in black. Priests speak softly. Nobles gather behind closed doors, voices low and eyes darting. Everyone's waiting, not for mourning to end, but for new orders to begin. You see people still bow when they pass Whitehall Palace, even though the king lies cold within. Habit maybe. Or maybe it's because deep down they don't believe he's really gone. Not after everything. Not after decades of dread and decrees. Even now stories swirl. Some claim his ghost stalks the tower, checking to see if the heads are still on straight. Others say his spirit rides through the mist at night, searching for wives' enemies, or perhaps just someone else to blame. You pass a scribe, carefully editing old letters, crossing out phrases that once flattered the king. You hear of a maid burning a diary just in case her opinion of Catherine Howard might be misread. Even the dead can indict you after all. Historians still argue what Henry truly left behind: an empire reborn, a church reshaped, or simply a nation trained to flinch. One thing is certain: the fear lingers. You visit a country chapel where someone has quietly restored a statue of the Virgin Mary. It was hidden for years, buried beneath floorboards. No one says anything. They just look at it, hands folded, as if unsure whether they're allowed to hope again. And you, survivor of his reign, witness to his whims, feel a strange kind of grief. Not for the man, but for the decades you spent shrinking under his shadow. Because now, in the silence that follows him, you realize fear didn't die with the king. It merely changed its face. If this glimpse into Henry VIII's reign made your spine tingle, just wait until you see what his daughter Mary did next. Henry ruled with fear, but he didn't take that fear to the grave. His daughter Mary, better known as Bloody Mary, picked it up and lit it on fire. If you thought this was chilling, just wait. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter of England's darkest reign. And comment below which moment in Henry's story haunted you the most. And if you think the terror ended when the throne went quiet, then you've never stood where the servants stood. Let's step deeper into Henry's world, not through the throne room, but through the servants' entrance. The ones who saw him at his most unguarded, who heard him snore, curse, bleed. Because to truly understand Henry's reign, you need to stand behind him with the ones holding the chamber pot. You're a servant in the king's privy chamber, a space meant for the monarch's utmost privacy. But in Henry's case, privacy never meant safety. The walls may be draped in tapestries, but they echo with tension. Everyone here is scared of the mood swings of the rumors of being noticed. Your job sounds simple: fetch goblets, hold torches, lay out the king's linen shirt just so. But tonight, his usual valet coughed during supper, and now you're called in. No one explains if he's sick or sent to the tower. You just take the folded shirt with trembling hands and pray you guessed the right side to face outward. The flicker of your candle dances on polished silver. The king likes his wine at a certain temperature. If it's too warm, he throws it. If it's too cold, he asks questions. And if he asks questions, you'd better know what Lady Rochford said to the groom of the guard 3 nights ago. Because even I don't know can sound like treason. The stone floors chill your feet through thin slippers. There's no fire in this hall. Heat means smoke, and smoke might irritate His Majesty's nose. So you shiver quietly and walk softly, the hem of your tunic brushing against shadows. Tonight, you're not alone. A page from Calais has just arrived. He's already too loud, too curious. You catch him asking about Anne Boleyn's old room. You turn your eyes downward and try to remember his face, because odds are you'll never see it again. Historians still argue whether this nightly dread was exaggeration. After all, many servants lived long, dull lives. But records show a peculiar turnover rate in Henry's inner chamber staff. Some disappear from the rolls without note. Others get promotions only after someone else falls ill. There's no clock to mark the hour, only the king's snores or sudden silences. Tonight, he mumbles something in Latin. You don't dare look up. You just refill the goblet. His hand jerks. You back away before it becomes a slap. He's dreaming you hope. Your role is called gentleman of the chamber, but nothing about this feels gentle. Still, it's better than the kitchens, or the tower, or worse, being noticed. Because tonight, as every night, the unspoken rule among royal servants is simple: remain invisible or become unforgettable in all the wrong ways. You'd think gossip over chamber pots would be harmless. After all, what's more mundane than scrubbing porcelain and whispering about the Queen's new headdress? But in Henry VIII's court, even whispers echo too loudly. The scullery smells of boiled meat and old beer. You crouch near a wash basin, elbow deep in linens, as a chambermaid leans in close. Her voice drops to a breath. They say the gardener saw Lady Catherine weeping near the Queen's chapel. It's probably nothing, but you both freeze as boots echo down the corridor. The boots don't stop. They pass. You exhale, slowly. No one's supposed to talk like this, especially not near the pipes. Because yes, even plumbing carries voices, and you never know who's crouched on the other end listening. Henry's paranoia isn't just contagious, it's institutional. He funds it. He feeds it. He turns even toilet breaks into acts of potential treason. And yet the human need to share that itch to pass on what you heard from a footman who heard it from the candle boy never disappears. So, servants develop new languages. A raised eyebrow means the Queen is in disfavor. A folded cloth on the east bench means don't mention Cromwell today. This is the part of court life. The grand portraits never show the network of coated coughs, flicked fingers, and how everyone knows not to look directly at the man emptying the chamber pot, because he might be the king's ears. One footman named Ellis used to hum before speaking. Then one night, he hummed, muttered something about the king's ulcer, and never returned from feeding the dogs. The dogs, for the record, ate just fine. Historians still argue whether Henry actually employed spies in the kitchens and privy chambers, or whether his sheer reputation turned everyone into their own informant. Regardless, the result was the same. You whisper, you risk being heard. And the worst part, sometimes you want to be heard. You want to feel powerful for a second. So you drop a name, let slip a detail. You feel a rush. And then 2 days later, you're reassigned to a post no one's heard of near the Thames, where boats pass quietly at night and no one notices a splash. It's said the worst thing you could do was talk too much. The second worst, listen too well. Because in Henry's court, curiosity wasn't just dangerous, it was downright fatal. You wouldn't think wiping a royal backside came with political risk, but here you are, the groom of the stool, the most whispered about title in the Privy Chamber, an odd mix of valet confessor and, let's be honest, professional toilet companion. But don't laugh. This isn't low work. This is dangerous proximity. Your job: assist King Henry during his most personal moments, hand him clean cloths, track his diet, monitor his movements for signs of illness, and above all, say nothing, ever. Today, you're training under Master Norris, the current groom who's held this role longer than most men survive in court. He leans in and whispers, "Never offer advice unless asked." And if asked, still hesitate. You nod. You want to nod. But you're also watching the king's expression as he eases onto the stool, because even his frowns can cost you your job. The stool itself is carved oak padded and covered with crimson velvet, lavish for its purpose. But everything in Henry's life, even defecation, is wrapped in ceremony. You don't just assist, you attend. You note the time, the temperature. You pass perfumed water. And if the king decides to talk politics mid-wipe, you smile, nod, and try not to react. One day he complains about the clergy. The next he wants news of Spain. You must remember every word, then forget it immediately. Because the groom of the stool walks a line tighter than the royal hose, too loyal, and you're envied, too casual, and you're condemned. Historians still argue how much influence these men truly had. Some say they whispered names into Henry's ear while he was at his most unguarded. Others think they were glorified butlers. But one thing is clear: many grooms rose to power, and some fell so fast it's like they were never there. You remember the tale of Sir William Compton. One moment, he's in the king's inner circle. The next, he's summoned, scolded, and silenced, possibly over something he overheard while holding the royal breeches. So tonight, as you tidy the privy and refill the cedar-scented basin, you say nothing. You think nothing. You barely breathe. Because being this close to the throne, the actual literal throne, is the most perilous place of all. The kitchens of Whitehall should feel comforting. Warm ovens, clattering pans, scents of roast and rosemary. But they don't. Not to you. Not anymore. You've learned something strange here. In a palace of 1 to 200 rooms, the most dangerous conversations happen next to boiling stew. The kitchen staff work fast. Eyes down, knives quicker. There's no laughter, just the thump of cleavers and the hiss of steam. One mistake and you're out, not just fired, but possibly flayed, metaphorically or not. Why? Because the king is hungry, and a hungry Henry is a furious Henry. Your job tonight is minor refilling oil jugs, scrubbing pots, but the tension is high. The court's expecting Pheasant. Pheasant was late. Someone blamed the courier. Then someone mentioned that courier's uncle who once served Anne Boleyn. Now the pastry cook won't make eye contact. Last month a pie came out lopsided. The king scowled. The scullion who had shaped the crust disappeared by morning. You stir soup gently and overhear a bread girl say, "Did you hear what the French ambassador asked Lady Seymour?" A glance, a silence, then a quiet reply. "Say that again, and you'll be cleaning larders in Calais." Historians still argue how many spies lurked in the royal kitchens. Was it just paranoia? Or did Henry truly plant informants among the spit-turners? A recently uncovered letter hints at cooks being questioned by the Privy Council about idle chat while slicing onions. There are escape routes, of course. Servants make excuses to run to the cellars. Some hide in the pantry to cry. Others simply go mute, pretending to be hard of hearing until retirement or exile. But here's the truth. Boiling stew masks murmurs well, and those who talk over the bubbling pot sometimes forget that ears are everywhere, even ones hiding behind sacks of grain. So tonight, you wash the ladle, you hum a meaningless tune, and you keep your thoughts salted and sealed. Because in Henry's court, the kitchens don't just cook meals, they cook consequences. The masquerade ball is supposed to be a break, a breath, a night when even servants smile behind masks and music drowns out fear. But you've worked enough of these to know the only thing sharper than the dagger at your hip is the glance from someone who knows who you are even behind the mask. Tonight, the great hall glows with candlelight. Painted paper stars hang from rafters. The air smells of cinnamon sweat and anticipation. The king, dressed as a Roman emperor, has already downed 2 goblets of spiced wine. You stand near the musicians, adjusting cloaks, passing goblets, keeping eyes on the queen's hemline so it doesn't snag. And that's when it starts. A nobleman, dressed as a falconer, whispers something to a lady in fox ears. She freezes. He laughs. The laughter doesn't spread. He's gone by morning. These balls often begin with jest and end with judgment. One year, the king dressed as Robin Hood and his entourage kidnapped guests for fun. 2 guests weren't seen again. Another time, a servant spilled wine on a duchess's gown. He was relieved of duties. The gown was burned. You glance across the room and see a jester twitch slightly when a minstrel plays the wrong note. You hear nothing, but you feel the tension spike like a sudden draft in the room. Historians still argue whether Henry's court masquerades were just decadent pageantry or deliberate tests of loyalty. Some believe these events were rehearsals for real intrigue, watching who danced with who hesitated, who laughed too hard. Tonight, a lady drops her mask. A guard steps forward, then retreats. Nothing happens yet. You make a mental note of her face, just in case it comes up later, just in case someone asks what you saw. The night continues, laughter forced, music tense. Behind each gilded mask is someone wondering, if I speak too freely, will I still be dancing next week? Because here, at a Tudor ball, even your silence could be misinterpreted, especially when the king is watching from behind a lion mask, smiling, but only with his teeth. You've never seen so many locks. Every door, every chest, even the latrine has a latch. The palace isn't just opulent, it's fortified, but not against invasion, against each other. You've learned the hard way. Never enter a room you weren't summoned to. Never touch a handle with royal insignia. And never, under any circumstance, open a locked chest even if it's rattling. You once saw a boy named Piers, no older than 14, push open a door, left ajar. Inside, the king's personal map room. He barely stepped inside before a guard grabbed his arm hard enough to leave bruises. He claimed he was looking for linens. He wasn't seen again. His replacement now sweeps in silence and avoids even closed doors. Tonight, you're delivering candles. The hallway is dim and narrow. One of the doors creaks. You pause. Wait. breathe, then move along. You know better than to check. Locks here aren't just metal. They're social barriers, reminders. This is not your house. This is not your kingdom. You're not welcome unless you're wanted. Still, some doors call to you. The king's library, rumored to contain banned books. The queen's dressing room, where secrets flutter like silk sleeves. The treasury, the chapel, the private stairwells, each with a different key, each held by a different man, and each man watching you. Historians still argue whether Henry's obsession with control stemmed from fear or strategy. Maybe both. He trusted few, dismissed many, and built a palace where entry meant danger and denial meant safety. Locks became language. A double bolt on a side door meant someone was inside sick or being questioned. A missing latch meant either extreme trust or a trap. Sometimes both. Tonight, you sleep near the servants' quarters, wrapped in a scratchy blanket. Your dreams filled with doors you shouldn't open, and hands pulling you through. Because in Henry's court, curiosity doesn't kill the cat. It kills the candlestick boy who thought the latch was broken. You wouldn't think someone could die from a sigh, but in Henry's court, a royal exhale could mean the end of your career or your entire bloodline. You're in the presence chamber today, helping arrange cushions near the king's chair he's reading or pretending to. One elbow rests on the table. A single finger drums against the wood. Then comes the sigh, soft, slow, measured. And now everyone in the room freezes. What kind of sigh was it? Was it disappointment? Boredom? A sign that someone is about to lose their head? You glance sideways. A page drops his gaze. The queen's physician subtly steps backward. Even the greyhound at Henry's feet stiffens. This is the courtly art. No book teaches reading a royal sigh. It's part language, part survival instinct. Is his brow furrowed? Are the knuckles white? Did he blink? Once or twice, you whisper nothing. You shift your weight ever so slightly, just enough to move your shadow from his footrest. That you've learned is important. A shadow on the king's shoe. Treason adjacent. Servants pass down these tricks in terrified whispers. Never speak if he's humming. Always wait 2 seconds after he sighs. If he looks at the window, don't breathe. Historians still debate whether Henry was truly this mercurial or whether those around him simply believed he was. Either way, the result is the same: a court built on body language. A monarchy run by micro-expressions. It's said that once a lady-in-waiting made eye contact during a long exhale. She curtsied. He said nothing. She vanished within a week. Another servant swears Henry once chuckled after a particularly long sigh. Everyone relaxed until he ordered 3 men questioned that evening. 2 returned. 1 did not. So today, you hold a bowl of rose water and pretend not to notice his lips purse. You listen without reacting, and you remind yourself the safest servant is the one who reacts only after everyone else does. Because here, at the center of power, your survival may hinge not on what you hear, but on how well you interpret a sigh. You've never seen anyone sweat inside a suit of armor quite like the king. Today is fitting day. A new set of plate armor commissioned for an upcoming parade, or perhaps a war, though no one dares ask which. Your job. Hold the buffing cloth. Stand by with clean linens, and pray the straps don't catch skin. Henry stands in the center of the chamber, arms slightly out, like some sacred statue, but far less serene. His face is flushed, his breath heavy. Two pages adjust his gorget. Another tugs at the greaves. He glares at the fourth boy. Too tight. The boy flinches. The strap loosens. The king shifts, now too loose. You step forward to wipe sweat from his brow. Your hand trembles. You've seen others punished for touching the wrong side of his face. It's not just the weight of the armor that strains him. It's the strain of everything. Each new inch on his waist means a wider cuirass. Each new ulcer on his leg means another squire sworn to silence. You hear his groan as he moves, and you wonder, does anyone ever tell him the truth? Historians still debate how much armor Henry truly wore in battle. Was it ceremonial? Was it vanity? Was it meant to project strength or to cover weakness? One theory suggests some sets were fakes, tin-plated illusions of grandeur. But today's armor is real and heavy and dangerously sharp at the joints. You recall the story of a blacksmith's apprentice who pinched the king's skin while latching the spalder. The king struck him with a gauntlet. His ear was never the same. You wipe again. The king grimaces. You hope it's at the heat and not at you. And then quietly he mutters, "Tell the tailor, wider next time." You nod. Not too eagerly, not too slow, just right. Because in Henry's court, even his armor expands, but never as quickly as his suspicion. She smiles at you every morning. That soft, polished kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. And yet your spine straightens every time. She's a lady in waiting. But don't let the embroidery fool you. She watches more closely than the guards do. You're arranging rosewater bowls outside the queen's chamber today. As you lean forward, you catch a flicker of movement. Her. Same saffron gown, same subtle nod. You murmur a polite greeting. She doesn't reply, just continues walking. But hours later, your supervisor informs you your boots were too muddy. You're reassigned to night duty. No one said she reported you. No one needs to. The ladies in waiting know everything. Who snuck into which hallway? Which lord slurred his words last night? Who stares too long at whom? They are the court's velvet-draped mirrors, and not always by choice. Being close to the queen means being close to power, and that means surviving by knowing what to say and when. Sometimes you see them whispering among themselves, not loudly, not often. A flick of the wrist here, a raised eyebrow there. A fan snapped shut at the wrong moment can unravel someone's entire week. One was known to remember every servant's name and workload, kind people said. She's now in exile. No one says her name anymore. Historians still argue whether these women had true influence or were just decorative shadows of real power. But you know better. They know things before anyone else because they listen, they watch, and they never forget. You once heard of a girl who corrected the Queen's French pronunciation. She meant it kindly. The lady in waiting beside her smiled, and the girl was serving gruel in the cellar by sundown. So you keep your head down. Your words few, and when one of them compliments your rosewater, you smile, but you don't ask what she means. Because in Henry's court, the ladies may wait, but they never miss. Tonight, The lute player hits a sour note and five heads turn like it's a pistol shot. Music at court is not just entertainment, it's a language. And in Henry's time, some believe it carried messages few dared speak aloud. You're sweeping Nesser Simea near the minstrel's gallery. When you notice something strange, the melody shifts. Subtly, a single bar played in reverse. A refrain repeated with a sharper edge. To most, it's a tune. To a trained ear, it's a whisper. Henry loved music, composed it even, but he also feared it. Some say he once ordered a ballad banned for hinting that the king weeps when no one sees. No one ever found out who wrote it. Tonight's musicians know this. Their faces are still, but their fingers tremble. They play court dances, safe, formal, rehearsed, but between the notes, you hear it a tiny shift. A song once favored by Anne Boleyn, a dissonant chord during the Queen's entrance, too subtle to prove, too bold to ignore. A lutenist once gave a private performance for the king. 2 days later, he was accused of sedition. His only defense: I played what was requested. He wasn't seen again. Historians still argue whether musicians embedded messages intentionally or whether frightened courtiers simply imagined them. Either way, music gained weight. Every note could be a nod, every silence a scream. You remember the tale of the flutist who refused to play a certain hymn. My fingers are sore, he said. His fingers were broken by dawn. So now you sweep and listen. Not for beauty, but for meaning. For the coded warning of who's rising, who's falling, who's about to be dragged down a stairwell no one admits exists. Tonight's final tune is light, quick, cheerful, too cheerful. You know what that means. Because in Henry's court, even the minstrels know the most dangerous notes aren't wrong. They're deliberate. There's a wrong time to light a candle. You learned that your first week at court when a maid lit one too early outside the king's door. He wasn't asleep yet. He saw the flicker, took it as impatience, and had her reassigned to the poultry yard. She never smelled the same after. Tonight, your hands fumble with flint and wick. It's nearly dusk, and shadows stretch across the stone corridors. The king hasn't stirred from his nap, and you've been ordered to prepare his chamber, but not before he wakes. No one says why. They don't need to. Every servant knows a candle lit too soon makes the king feel rushed. Too late, and he stumbles in the dark. Either mistake is yours. You strike the flint once, twice. You pause. Listen. Nothing. A third time, and it flares. That tiny flame holds more than light. It's responsibility. It says, I'm aware of your presence, your preferences, your power. You walk carefully, shielding the flame with your palm like it's a holy relic. There's a story about a boy named Edward who used lard instead of beeswax. The smell offended Henry. Edward was found trying to scrape it off the walls the next day. He was still scraping when the guards took him. Historians still argue whether these rituals were rooted in Henry's vanity, superstition, or chronic illness. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. Everything has rules. Lighting candles, folding sheets, pouring water. You've even heard of a servant who rotated candle wicks clockwise instead of counterclockwise. Foreign custom, they said. He was relieved by supper. Now your flame flickers in the chamber. You tiptoe inside, curtains half drawn, books left askew. You light the second candle slower this time. The king shifts in his sleep. You freeze. Nothing. Then he snores. You exhale, but not all the way. Just enough. Because in Henry's court, survival isn't about strength or loyalty. It's about knowing exactly when to bring light. You've seen the Tower of London, not from the inside yet, but from nearly every window alcove and narrow stairwell you've ever cleaned. It looms, always. You might be folding towels in the Queen's chamber, and there it is, gray stone, on the horizon, a grim punctuation mark in the skyline. A reminder. Most castles are symbols of safety. The tower is not. It's a promise. And in Henry's reign, it keeps getting fulfilled. You serve tea to a lord at breakfast. By sundown, his goblet sits untouched, and he's in a cart on the way to Tower Hill. Sometimes you think you can hear the distant creak of that cart even before the orders come. No one talks about the tower directly. They say things like, he's gone east, or he's off to reconsider things. But the servants know. You always know. One missing plate at supper, one chair unclaimed, one extra guard on duty. There's a story of a seamstress who once embroidered too closely to Anne Boleyn's initials after her downfall. Innocent mistake, she claimed. Her family packed her things before nightfall. Her room was filled by morning. Historians though still argue whether Henry's use of the tower was uniquely cruel or simply efficient. After all, it wasn't just a prison. It was a tool, a place where people disappeared, not only physically, but from memory. You've learned to walk quickly past the archways with views. You avoid the eastern windows entirely, and if you must pass near them, you don't linger. You don't pause. You certainly don't comment. And yet the tower finds you in dreams, in gossip, in the terrified silence that follows any unexpected summons. You fold your cloths tightly tonight, neatly, exactly as instructed. Because in Henry's court, the tower is more than a place, it's a shadow, and you never know when it's falling on you. Dinner shouldn't feel like a prophecy. But in Henry's court, every dish served, every goblet filled, every seat assigned says something. And sometimes it says too much. You're on service tonight at the long feast table in Hampton Court. The candles are trimmed, the platters gleam, and the tapestries ripple slightly from a draught no one dares mention. The food smells divine, roast boar, sugared, quince-peppered swan, but you barely notice. You're watching. Everyone is. First, the king's favorite appears, venison stew. That's expected. Then eel pie. Less expected. Someone coughs at the far end. A subtle flinch follows. You glance at the lord seated 2 chairs down. Last week, one of them toasted too early. Tonight, his goblet is empty. No servant dares refill it. Next course, spiced apples, a known favorite of the queen's sister. A servant across the hall tenses. She served in that household before her reassignment. By dessert, the message is clear. Alliances are shifting. You can taste it in the custard. There's an old superstition here, probably made up by desperate servants, that if your plate arrives cold, you've been marked. That if your fork slips, it's a sign. That if the king looks away as you speak, you should sleep in your clothes, just in case. Historians still debate whether Henry truly orchestrated these subtleties or if his courtiers simply read too much into a spilled goblet. But in a place where beheadings followed banquet toasts by mere days, the line between real danger and perceived offense vanishes like steam off hot broth. You once saw a platter return to the kitchens. Too much salt, said the king. The boy who carried it never came back. So now, as you step forward to serve the next course, you do so with steady hands and a quiet mind. You set the tray gently, you bow once, you leave. Because in Henry's court, a feast isn't just food, it's forewarning. Even the jester knows when not to laugh. He's there tonight, bells jangling softly, makeup smudged, grin stretched just wide enough to entertain, and just small enough to survive. You've seen him dance juggle mock nobility with clever rhyme, but you've also seen him flinch when the king's eye lingers too long. You're stationed near the tapestry's candle tray in hand, watching the jester twirl. The court laughs a little too hard, but you can tell. They're watching Henry, not the joke. The jester points to a lord and makes a jest about gout. The room hushes. That lord is rumored to have the king's ear. The jester chuckles awkwardly, tosses a ball in the air, spins. Crisis averted barely. Everyone knows the rules. Humor is welcome as long as it flows in only one direction. Upward jesting dangerous, downward safer, sideways suicidal. You once overheard the jester muttering lines to himself near the stables, practicing, rehearsing, praying. He keeps a book of old jokes tucked in his boot, crossing out ones that got too close to past scandals. Historians still argue whether Henry's jesters were truly free to speak the truth, or whether they simply danced at the edge of execution, always one pun away from punishment. There's even a legend about a fool who quipped about the king's waistline and found himself retired to silence. Tonight, a servant drops a platter. A clang echoes. The jester improvises a tumble, drawing laughter away from the panic. It works. The king smiles. The jester smiles wider. And you exhale. Later, as the hall empties, you catch the jester in a shadowed corridor alone. No jokes, no smile. Just a man who survived another day with his neck intact. Because in Henry's court, even the ones who make you laugh know that sometimes the loudest jokes are shields and the quietest rooms the most dangerous. When he finally sleeps, no one dares to exhale too loud. The king is in his chamber. The great crimson canopy, drawn the fire low, his leg bandaged and propped on a velvet stool. You and two others wait in the shadows still as the wax figurines on his shelf. Every breath he takes sounds like it might be his last, or worse, not his last. The kind of breath that turns into an order at midnight, or a question you can't answer correctly. You adjust a pillow, slowly, quietly. He grumbles in his sleep. You freeze. This moment, right here, is the eye of the storm. The part of the night that seems peaceful, but holds the most tension. Because when Henry sleeps, the entire palace pauses. Every footstep muffled, every door cushioned, every mouse silently praying not to sneeze. Historians still debate the level of control Henry maintained in his later years. With his health failing, his mood souring, and his body deteriorating, was he still fully in command? Or was it simply the echo of power keeping everyone petrified? Does it matter? You've seen servants sent away for yawning too close to the chamber. Heard stories of one man banished for stepping on a floorboard that creaked too loud beneath the royal cot. A punishment for disrupting rest, they said. And so you stand there, the candle burning low, the scent of lavender and old sweat thick in the air. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, no one moves. Because in Henry's court, peace was never safe, not even in sleep. And tonight, as his chest rises and falls in uneven rhythm, every servant waits not for morning but for permission to breathe. The king still sleeps upstairs. You, however, are already wide awake, long before the sun touches the tower's edge, long before any courtier stirs. Because today, you might be called, and you are not a cook, nor a page, nor a chambermaid. You are the executioner. Your hands ache from yesterday's oiling. The blade's weight never really leaves your shoulders. Even now, resting by the hearth, you feel it like a ghost leaning on your back. You run your fingers along the grain of the axe shaft, smooth, familiar, not comforting. Most mornings begin this way, silence tools thoughts. You stare at the corner of the room where your hood hangs, just cloth, but heavy with memory. You don't put it on unless summoned. Superstition. Maybe survival instinct. There's no ceremony here, no knightly armor or heraldic flourish. Just a man, a blade, and a list you hope has no names today. But sometimes there's a knock, and when that knock comes, it's not always official. A messenger might whisper, "Be ready, that's all." No writ, no seal, just a nod. Historians still argue how many official records were altered, forged, or never made at all. Quiet executions weren't just whispered legend. They were policy. Your predecessor used to say, "It's not the swing that damns you, it's the waiting." He lost his grip once on the axe, not his nerve. They replaced him within a week. You remember the first time they asked you to prepare. It was raining. You sharpened your blade while watching worms drown in puddles. You'd never spoken to the condemned. You never would again. Today, the blade is already sharp, just in case. Because in Henry's England, you never plan to kill before breakfast. But if the king so much as mumbles the right name in his sleep, you will. The condemned rarely know the hour. You do. Not because they tell you, but because the timing itself is part of the message. Not just to the crowd gathered outside the tower, not just to the nobles watching from embroidered cushions, but to everyone else in court. Today the knock comes just after dawn. That's not typical. It means urgency, or secrecy, or both. The boy at the door avoids your eyes. He said, "Make ready. No name, no scroll. Just those two words." You nod. You don't ask who. You never ask who. The blade has already been honed. You reach for your thick gloves, not for the cold, but for grip. Sweat and steel don't mix well when necks are involved. You glance at the tower's shadow, stretching over the courtyard. It'll be at its longest by mid-morning. That's usually when nobles are shown to the scaffold. Why? Because shadows elongate, because faces blur in backlight, because fear travels farther when cast long. Historians still argue whether execution times were chosen for symbolism or convenience, but you've seen the patterns. Public deaths at midday meant spectacle. Private ones at dawn meant someone important had fallen, someone whose end would whisper louder than any scream. You remember Anne's execution. Early, clean, deliberate, a French sword instead of an axe. You didn't swing that day, but you stood nearby holding the tools and holding your breath. When she knelt, even the crows stopped moving. Today, the courtyard smells of damp moss and burned bread. Somewhere in the kitchens, someone is preparing porridge. They don't know yet, or they do, and they stir faster. You check the angle of the block, the fresh sawdust, the position of the sun, because when the hour comes, and it always does, you want the message to be clear, not just who died, but when. You don't learn how to swing on a human not at first. They start you on sacks, heavy ones packed with straw and wet cloth. The weight mimics flesh. The resistance mimics bone. And if you hit wrong, the sack sags, laughs, spills. No one laughs when it's a person. Your first lesson came from a man called Hob. He swung with a crooked back and a sour mouth, but he had stories. The trick, he said, is the wrist, not the shoulder. Axes don't favor brutes. They favor angles. He demonstrated on a pig carcass. Even that felt wrong. You remember how the blade thunked into the wood below, how it stuck, how it didn't slice so much as collapse the pig around it. You remember thinking, this is what a mistake feels like. And you will make mistakes. Hob warned you. Everyone does. But the good ones learn when the crowd forgives and when it doesn't. Some victims flinch. Some look up. Some beg. That last part is the worst. Because once you've heard someone beg, your arms remember it. Historians still argue how trained most executioners were. Some believe they were just laborers handed an axe. Others say they practiced formally frequently in ways too grim for record. You suspect both are true. Officially, you're skilled. Unofficially, you're scared every time. You've seen a man take 4 swings to end a life. You've seen another faint before the first. You've heard the crowd gasp, not at blood, but at failure. And once, when a nobleman's head rolled the wrong way, someone laughed. No one saw that man again. Today, you rehearse on a fresh log. Not because you expect a name, but because you always expect a name. Because in Henry's England, the axe must never hesitate, and neither must your hands. Apprentices vanish more often than heads. You've seen them come wide-eyed, calloused-palmed, eager for coin or curiosity. Boys who think wielding the axe means power. They last a week, maybe 2. Then one day they're gone. No blood, no scene. Just silence. You once knew one Thomas, good with rope knots, laughed too much, said he wanted to make history. He did, briefly, dropped the blade during a mock swing. The crowd jeered. The condemned wept. Thomas wasn't seen after supper. They never tell you what happened. You just find your tools cleaned by someone new. Training an executioner is awkward business. Not quite royal, not quite criminal. You're too close to the crown to be dismissed, but too close to death to be welcomed. So you're taught in shadows. Lessons whispered over tankards. Practice done in stables away from windows. And you're not just trained to swing. You're trained to stand. Still, silent, stoic. They say fear travels through posture, and in Henry's court, you must never tremble even when everyone else does. Historians still debate whether Tudor executioners were formally apprenticed or informally recycled. The truth you suspect lies in the tower's empty bunks and the ever-changing faces behind the hoods. One apprentice swore the axe whispered before each strike. Another claimed to see faces in the grain of the woodblock. Most just drank too much and stopped speaking altogether. You learn quickly not to get close, not to ask names, not to share meals, because one day you might be the one clearing out their tools. Tonight, you polish the blade again, alone. You think of Thomas, his laugh, his hands, and you wonder not for the first time if you'll vanish quietly too. Because in Henry's England, even the executioner's understudy knows some jobs don't end in retirement. They just end. They say some heads talk back. You don't believe it, not entirely, but you've seen enough to wonder. There's a moment right after the axe falls when the world goes quiet, a pause between life and stillness. And in that space, sometimes you swear the eyes blink, the mouth twitches, the lips purse as if to say one final word. Once, a noble woman's head rolled sideways, jaw clenched, nostrils flaring. The crowd gasped. A guard crossed himself. You looked away. Another time, a poet condemned for heresy smiled as you raised the axe. Her head fell smiling. Some swore it whispered a line of verse before it stopped moving. Historians still debate these tales. Science says consciousness ends in seconds, but fear doesn't follow science. Fear listens to the man next to you, swearing the eyes watched him as he picked up the body. You've heard the guards share stories late at night of heads that spat of blood, that bubbled too long of a mouth, mouthing nothing, but looking like it meant everything. You once stayed behind to clean the block. You knelt rag in hand alone. The torch guttered. Something dripped, and for a breathless second, you thought you heard breathing. Just behind you. You turned. Nothing. But since then, you never stay long. You clean fast. You leave faster. You've buried enough heads to know they don't talk. But sometimes you still dream of them. The eyes, the mouths, the way the silence after feels more charged than the moment before. Because in Henry's England, even the dead have a way of speaking. And you, more than anyone, have learned how to listen. It doesn't matter how clean the cut is, someone always boos. Maybe it's the relatives. Maybe it's rivals. Maybe it's just the kind of noble who thinks yelling shame from the velvet benches counts as courage. You stand by the scaffold today, the crowd pressing closer than usual. Rain slicks the timber. The condemned is a minor baron guilty of something no one truly understands, but enough to make it public. You nod to the guard. He steps back. You raise the axe. And you hear it, a cough, a groan, then unmistakably, "Get on with it, butcher." That word again, butcher. You've been called worse. But the tone sticks. You swing. The cut is clean. The body slumps. The crowd exhales. Then someone hurls a crust of bread. It misses. But still, it happened. Historians still argue whether executioners were reviled figures or respected ones. Some received royal pay. Some were buried outside church grounds. Some lived in hidden corners of London, paid in coin and shame. You live in both worlds. One moment, the Queen's steward nods respectfully. The next, a washerwoman won't meet your eyes. Children stare. Dogs growl. You walk past a tavern and hear silence fall like a blade. And if a swing goes poorly, if the blade sticks, or the condemned cries out, or the head doesn't land quite right, that silence turns to outrage. Even fear doesn't shield you then. You once heard of an executioner who missed twice. The third blow ended not just the prisoner, but his own career. He was sent north, or buried, depending who you ask. So now you rehearse the arc. You oil the haft. You stand straight on the scaffold, even in rain, even under bread throwers and name callers. Because in Henry's England, applause is rare. But silence, that's worse. And a boo, that's just the start of forgetting who you are. Anne Boleyn didn't scream. That's what stays with you most, not her jewels, not the French swordsman flown in to make it swift. Just the stillness, the way she knelt, the way she whispered. You weren't the one to swing that day. They said Henry wanted it clean, continental, as if changing the style made it kinder. But you were there, just beyond the platform, holding the cloth ready to wrap what remained. She wore gray. Her lips moved some prayer maybe, or maybe she named him. No one agrees. The swordsman bowed. She smiled. And when the blade flashed, no sound followed. Later, you wiped blood from the wooden block and realized your hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from what she didn't do. No plea, no fight, not even tears. Historians still debate whether Anne's composure was bravery or performance, whether her final words were, "To Jesus Christ, I commend my soul," or something more damning. But you remember the hush that fell afterward. Even the birds seemed to pause. You took her head, placed it gently in linen as instructed. You saw the curve of her cheek, the faint crease where the hood had pressed. You thought she looks younger now. That night, the king feasted. You didn't eat, because in Henry's England, you learn this: the ones who go silently are the ones who stay with you longest. And Anne Boleyn. Anne never left. Not every neck suits an act. Some are too slender, some too thick, some too nervous, some too proud. And for the truly highborn, sometimes, it's not even an axe at all. The tools matter, more than anyone admits. Today, you lay out three: a long-handled axe, its edge like silver thunder, a smaller backup just in case, and wrapped in oilcloth, the imported French sword, flat, elegant, designed not for hacking, but for slicing with precision. You used to think all blades were the same. Steel is steel, right, wrong. A bad blade shudders, jerks, bounces. A good one whispers, moves like breath through silk. You've tested them on hay bales, pigs, even thick bundles of reeds. And yet no preparation equals the moment the condemned kneels and the crowd holds its breath. The French sword is rare, reserved. It was brought in for Anne and kept just in case. Only a few even know where it's stored. When they ask for it, you know this one matters. Historians still argue why Henry used it. A nod to chivalry, guilt theatrics, or just a desire to make her death look neater than their marriage. Axes are for traitors, swords are for queens. You once had to use a rusted axe on a stable thief. It chipped halfway through. The sound stayed in your ears for days. Now, you sharpen daily, not just to keep the edge, but to keep control. Because the blade must be the only thing with power when the hour comes. You wrap each tool again, set them in their place, clean and ready. Because in Henry's court, the manner of your death was the final headline, and your weapon, the punctuation. Some get a period, others get an exclamation mark. You get the official orders by candlelight, not the scroll. That's for show. What really matters is the voice that wakes you, the way it says, the name, the look that follows. It's not always a royal decree. It's sometimes a nod from the wrong person that seals a fate. Tonight, the voice is soft. It's time. No title, no explanation. But you understand, this isn't about justice. It's about appearance. An enemy made inconvenient. A friend too close to the wrong truth. You've seen it before. The king doesn't need a trial, he needs silence. There's no procession, no priest, just two guards and a body already bound. You're not even sure of the crime. You've learned not to ask. You don't recognize the man until you do. One of the king's falconers. You once watched him cradle a bird with a broken wing. He nods when he sees you. No fight, no tears, just quiet. That makes it harder. Historians still debate how many of these deaths were officially recorded. Some were noted, some erased, some never existed, except in the minds of those who heard the blade fall in darkness. You perform your duty, quick, precise, no ceremony. The guards take what remains. You douse the lantern. The blood smells the same no matter the rank. In the morning, no one mentions him. His room is reassigned, his falcon gone. And when the court assembles for breakfast, the king laughs as if nothing happened. Perhaps to him, nothing did. Because in Henry's England, not every execution comes with an audience. Some are done in whispers. Some aren't done at all. They're disappeared. There's no ceremony for what comes after. Once the crowd is gone, the nobles have turned away, and the scaffold creaks with emptiness. You clean up what's left. Blood doesn't soak evenly. Some drips through the boards. Some pools in the groove by the block. You learn to mop in silence. Tonight the wind is sharp, slicing through your cloak as you kneel with a bucket. The sawdust has turned to paste beneath your boots. You scrape it into a cloth bag. Disposal is someone else's job, not yours. A tooth lies by the step. You nudge it gently with the tip of your blade before picking it up. You don't flinch anymore. The guards are already gone. The priest never came. Only you remain. Because the king believes in swift justice but never lingers after it's served. You work slowly, not out of reverence, but because rushing feels wrong. The scaffold is a stage, yes, but also a grave. Historians still debate what became of the remnants. Some say heads were burned, some buried, some thrown in the Thames. The truth depends on the name. Highborns get quiet funerals, others quiet erasures. You wrap the block in linen. It will be reused. The axe too. The robe you wear is already stained, but no one asks why. You finish. You stand. The moon is bright tonight. The platform casts a long shadow over the courtyard. You imagine the condemned watching you clean. You don't speak to them, but sometimes you nod. Because in Henry's England, the death is public, but the silence after, that's yours alone. Mercy is a dangerous thing. Swing too quickly, they say you favored the prisoner. Swing too slowly, they say you enjoyed it. Either way, someone starts asking questions. Tonight, your orders are clear. Make it fast, but clarity doesn't come with protection. You've seen it before. Executioners punished not for disobedience, but for interpretation. The condemned is an old man, frail and near blind. His knees buckle as he walks. He mumbles a prayer, not to God, but to his dog, long dead, he says. You steady him as he kneels. He whispers, "Thank you." You hate when they say that. You raise the axe. You've measured the angle, checked the grain in the wood, accounted for the wind. You swing fast, mercifully fast, too fast. By supper, someone's asking if you showed pity. Someone else mutters about bias. You eat alone again. Historians still argue whether Tudor justice left room for compassion, whether any soul, even one holding the blade, could offer grace. Officially, you were a function, an extension of law. Unofficially, you were a test, a target. You once watched another executioner weep after a slow death. The crowd jeered. The court frowned. The king. He said nothing, but within the week, the man was relieved. So now, you rehearse neutrality. You practice blankness. You teach your hands not to flinch, your eyes not to water. And when you do give mercy, you give it without being seen. Because in Henry's England, kindness isn't a virtue, it's a calculation. And mercy, even in the cleanest cut, always leaves a stain. It's the face that undoes you. Not the crime, not the orders, not even the silence that follows the strike. No, it's when the hood is pulled back and you know them. Tonight, it happens. The condemned is brought forth just before dusk. He's hooded, shackled, quiet. You go through the motions, check the blade, nod to the guards, straighten the block. And then the hood slips, and you remember. He once shared a flask with you on a frost-bitten morning, laughed about a courtier's hat, helped you haul timber when no one else did. His name is William, or was. He meets your eyes. You want to look away, but protocol demands acknowledgement. So you hold his gaze. He nods. No words. You don't ask why he's here. Doesn't matter. In Henry's court, reasons are seasonal. Allies today, traitors tomorrow. Friendship has no shield. Historians still debate whether executioners were chosen for loyalty, detachment, or disposability. But they rarely ask what happens when familiarity enters the scaffold. You've seen it a handful of times, recognition. Sometimes it's mutual. Sometimes not. One woman once asked if she could be executed by someone else. You obliged. She kissed your hand anyway. Today, you do your job. You make it fast. You make it right. You carry what remains as gently as the law allows. Later, you clean your blade slower than usual. You trace your thumb along the grip he once repaired. You do not cry. Because in Henry's England, the moment you recognize the face is the moment you must forget it. You're paid in more than coin. After a clean execution, a servant brings a pouch thick with silver, the king's mark sealed in wax. Sometimes there's wine. Once there was meat, but it never tastes right. The coin clinks too loud. The meat always smells faintly of iron. Tonight the purse is heavier than usual. No note. Just wait. You set it aside. You'll bury it with the others somewhere behind the chapel wall, in that quiet corner where the grass grows patchier than it should. Royal executioners are compensated well on paper, but the cost is elsewhere. No one sits near you at meals. The laundress avoids your linens. The stable hands leave your horse unsaddled. Even your boots are cleaned last. You live within the court, but always just outside it. And yet, you get perks no other servant receives. No night watch interruptions. A private chamber. Occasionally, whispered warnings, don't drink the red wine at Tuesday's feast. The sort of respect born of fear, not fondness. Historians still debate whether Tudor executioners were truly ostracized or simply mythologized. You know the truth. It's both. Revered when needed, feared when remembered. You once saved a noble's son from drowning. No one mentioned it afterward, but when his father was condemned a year later, he asked for you by name. That's how it works. Today, you eat alone again. The bread is stale. The ale is warm, but the purse is full. And you wonder as you watch the moon rise whether anyone who pays this well ever truly values what they're buying. Because in Henry's England, justice has a price. But peace, that's never part of the payment. They say you talk in your sleep. You wouldn't know you're asleep when it happens. But the boy who brings you water each morning swears he's heard things, names, phrases, sometimes just numbers. You don't remember dreaming. Not really. But sometimes you wake with the taste of copper in your mouth and the feel of cold wood against your fingers like you were gripping the axe even in slumber. Tonight, the fire crackles low. You try to rest, but the silence stretches too wide and every creak in the beams above sounds like a whisper. You light a candle. The flame dances. You watch it flicker and think of the condemned who screamed until their throats gave out, of those who smiled, of the few who sang. Some believe you're haunted, that the souls of the dead cling to the one who ended them. You laugh at that out loud once, but only once, because since then, you've started waking at the same hour each night, always 3:07. Historians still argue whether executioners suffered mental decline or spiritual torment. You don't claim to know, but you've seen shadows move where none should be. You've smelled blood on your hands after 3 days off. You've felt a cold breath on your neck in summer. One morning, you find words carved into your wooden table. Words you don't remember writing. Forgive me. You stare at it for a long time. You pour water over it, but it never quite disappears. Because in Henry's England, the dead may fall quietly, but they don't always leave quietly, and when you sleep, you don't rest. You report. There's no ceremony for retirement, not for someone like you. You wake one day and the orders stop coming. The knock at your door is just wind. The axe stays where it hangs. No oiling, no polishing, just dust. The court still exists, still moves, still dines, still schemes, but you are no longer summoned. No one says why. No one says anything. You're not dismissed. You're simply no longer required. At first you feel relief, then uncertainty, then something worse, irrelevance. You try to walk the grounds like a normal man. Servants glance away. A boy drops a tray when he sees your face. Someone starts calling you the ghost. You visit the scaffold once out of habit. The wood has been scrubbed clean. New ropes, fresh sawdust. Someone else has taken your place. You don't ask who. Historians still debate what became of executioners after their final swing. Some were given pensions, some vanished. Some lived in quiet madness. One, they say, moved to a monastery, though whether to find peace or penance, no one knows. You remain close, but not in the palace. A stone cottage near the river, enough to hear the bells, far enough to avoid the stairs. You hang the hood in a chest, fold the robe, wrap the axe. You keep the purse of coins untouched, and sometimes, late at night, you sit by the fire and think about the ones who whispered, who prayed, who forgave you. You remember the weight of the axe, the weight of their eyes, and you wonder what will come for you when the time arrives. Because in Henry's England, even the executioner has an end. But no one tells you how to face it when the one being judged is finally yourself. As the fire burns low and the wind presses softly against the shutters, you settle back into your chair. The axe is put away, the hood folded. The night, at last, is quiet. You take a slow breath, letting the silence wrap around you like an old woolen cloak. The names, the faces, they drift further now, softened by time, by repetition, by the slow mercy of forgetfulness. You've carried the weight of history in your hands, but tonight you carry nothing at all. The scaffold is empty, the tower still. Even the whispers have gone quiet, and in this rare stillness, your shoulders drop, your hands rest, and your breath comes easy. Let the shadows pass. Let the memories sleep. Because tonight, no one calls your name. No orders arrive. No blade must rise. Just the hush of distant bells and the gentle rhythm of your breath. Rest now. You've done enough.